Alright, so it's time to do this shit again. Now, I want to make it clear that I hate watching most of these shows, most of them are very bad, and when I started doing these videos, I was overly optimistic. I had never watched, I've never gone out and watched all these anime that I normally wouldn't even check out, and now that I've done this so many times, I've come to the realization, I've embraced the reality that most anime are kind of bad. I hate watching most of the shows on this, but guess what? I love making the videos. It's always fun. It's worth the effort to go through to watch all the shows just to make these videos. So what I do here is I watch one episode of every not every show, that would be a huge undertaking. I watch one episode of a lot of shows airing every season. This season, I think it's the most I've done. Again, it's like 16 shows. I don't think you should take my recommendations all too seriously, but when it comes to the really bottom of the barrel shows, then you should probably take the recommendation pretty seriously. And just a quick side note, for a while now, I know I keep saying this, but I want to make more standalone anime videos. The thing is, I start making them, and it's so much different from making game reviews. I'm not as comfortable with it, of course, because I haven't done as many. And I feel like there's not as much to say, because with a video game, there's more to talk about. There's the technical aspects, there's the gameplay aspects, but with an anime, there's a lot less to talk about, and there's a lot less objectivity. It's a much more opinionated thing, and I'm working on 2 videos right now, one on Blend S, and the other was like a Made in Abyss video, and I'm not sure if either of those will come out. The Blend S one will probably come out, but I guess I can't get better unless I make more, so be on the lookout for those. Hopefully they both make their way to my YouTube channel. First up is, of course, Violet Evergarden, the most hyped up anime of recent memory, finally airing this season. Now, if you go onto Wikipedia and read, kind of a description of this show, it sounds fucking incredible. So here's the plot synopsis on Wikipedia. The story revolves around auto-memory dolls. Dolls initially created by a scientist named Dr. Oriand to assist his blind wife, Molly, in writing her novels, and later rented out to other people who needed their services. In the present time, the term referring to the industry of writing for others. While the initial function of auto-memory dolls is only to generate voices into text, a second group of people created a company that rented out beautiful, talented women who, while having the same function as the original auto-memory dolls, also can perform military-related tasks. So that sounds fucking awesome. It's one of the more serious shows that Kyoto Animation has ever made, based off the synopsis at least. And they put out all these teasers in the past year plus, where they show animation from the show and it looks incredible. So that's kind of the background story of the show. Really hyped up. If you're into anime, I'm sure you know all about this show and how hyped up it's been. Now here's the interesting thing about this show. It's the licensing rights outside of Japan have gone to Netflix, and if you don't mind, I'm going to diverge here a little bit and talk about some anime licensing politics because I think it's interesting, and it's also going to have a huge impact on the industry, both inside and outside of Japan. There's not a lot to read about this stuff because it's not seen as being a huge deal right now, but I think it's going to become one in the future. Anime is such a marketable, consumerist thing just inherently, and once a company like Amazon or Netflix gets their hands on that, there's no turning back. So Netflix not only has the licensing to this show, but they bill it as being a Netflix original, and the ending credits say that it was produced in association with Netflix, so I assume that Netflix actually funded this show's production in some way. In the past year, Netflix has been grabbing some pretty big titles. The last 2 big shows were Fate Apocrypha and Little Witch Academia. Both of those were 24-episode shows, and Netflix kind of stupidly in my opinion, decided not to simultaneously broadcast these shows and put them up every week, and instead decided that they're just going to drop them at the end of the season once they're all out. And when you've got a 24-episode show, that means people aren't going to see the thing until 24 weeks after it first aired. Those 2 shows had to be fan-subbed, but this time around Netflix is breaking that tradition and they're doing a simultaneous broadcast of Violet Evergarden. The show is being simultaneously broadcast pretty much everywhere. Europe, South and Central America, Canada, I believe. Yep, Canada. And there's even 5 languages that it's being dubbed into every week. So even Saudi Arabia is getting this show, but what place is mysteriously absent from the list? The United States. So this just boggles the fucking mind. Netflix is a US-based company, okay? So the only place that is not getting the show simultaneously broadcast is what you would assume to be their biggest market for the show and their home base. Why they would do that, I cannot understand. Now, you might think that it could be some kind of licensing issue, but like I mentioned earlier, it says in association with Netflix, so I get the impression that Netflix can do whatever the fuck they want with Violet Evergarden. So what this leads to is someone like me going online and just downloading the episodes. Now, I already have a Netflix subscription, so I'm not really saving any money, but it's just an inconvenience. But setting that silly little quirky issue aside, this makes me wonder how much time Crunchyroll has left. They're a tiny operation compared to Netflix, but a show like Violet Evergarden, one of the most, if not the most hyped up show in recent memory, is a huge blow for them. And then at the same time, you've got Amazon, who have closed down Anime Strike and put all those shows into the normal Amazon Prime Video library. Amazon themselves have a pretty decent back catalog of anime, nothing too substantial, but some decent shows that are big name titles. But guess what else they did? They snatched up the rights for Noitamina shows. So if you don't know, Noitamina, they usually broadcast shows that go beyond the normal anime fan demographic. Some shows from the past that have been on Noitamina, Anohana, Guilty Crown, Psycho Pass, Ping Pong the Animation, these are pretty big shows. Since Amazon has got the rights to Noitamina, shows that they've had exclusive rights to streaming when they come out have been shows like Cabernet of the Iron Fortress, Scum's Wish, Seikano Season 2. So I would say that's a pretty big deal, and if you notice, a lot of those shows are the kind of shows that people who are really into anime kind of give a fuck about. That's such like a savvy, in-the-know move to make, and I consider that to be like a power play. There's just no other way to interpret that. And I've been thinking about this for a while, between Netflix and Amazon, what is their end game here? Most households already have Amazon Prime and Netflix subscriptions these days, so a more niche service like Crunchyroll becomes very difficult to justify spending extra money on when the services you already subscribe to have a large catalog of shows. And I think that because the kind of person that would pay for a Crunchyroll subscription is the same kind of person who already has a Netflix and Amazon Prime subscription. And then add into that Crunchyroll's recent consistent inability to procure big shows like Violet Evergarden, that just makes things even worse. I don't see Amazon and Netflix getting lots of anime as a play to get themselves more subscribers, because like I said, I think that audience already has these subscriptions. Instead, this just serves the sole purpose of beating down and hurting Crunchyroll. I have to imagine that Netflix or Amazon have attempted to purchase Crunchyroll at some point, considering their recent interest in anime. Generally, look at Amazon. I want to do grocery stuff. I'm going to buy Whole Foods. It just would make sense for them to buy Crunchyroll and get that huge back catalog. I think it's possible that Amazon or Netflix or both have at some point approached Crunchyroll and tried to buy them out, but Crunchyroll said no, and what we're seeing right now is Amazon and Netflix kind of trying to beat them into submission and put them out of business. Because if Funimation and Crunchyroll were able to build up these huge licensing back catalogs, Amazon and Netflix have way more money, way more cachet than those two do, and they'd be able to build up themselves. So maybe the game plan here is to run Crunchyroll out of business, make them go bankrupt so that they have to sell these licenses, or that they're then willing to be bought out by Amazon or Netflix then. The way they're doing things now, I think this is the only explanation for it, because the rights to anime shows, while they're probably far less expensive than Hollywood movies or big-name American TV shows, it still costs money, and I don't think that they're making money off of that in the short run. But in the long run, if you're able to put Crunchyroll out of business and potentially get all of their licenses and bring them onto your platform, then maybe in the long run there is money to be made off of that. That's been the classic Amazon strategy that's got them so far, selling stuff for like a decade now, undercutting everyone else even if it's below cost for them, because it serves the effect of putting the competition out of business, and then in the long run, they're the only one left, and then they make their money. Similarly, Netflix, with all their original series that they've been paying for, like all the Marvel stuff, I've read that they've been making too many original series and they're actually losing money right now, but they're still making the series, so there's obviously a plan there. Now, licensing is one thing, that's not a really big deal, but when they're directly funding a show, which I don't think Crunchyroll has ever directly funded a show, but it seems like Netflix is doing that with Violet Evergarden, and then for sure with Devilman Crybaby, which I also am going to cover in this video. And that's why I think it's important that we pay attention to this, because when they do stuff like that, they're having a direct impact on the anime that we watch, changing the industry, changing the art form, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, time will tell, I don't know. But I will tell you that these are definitely power plays. I do think they're trying to run Crunchyroll out of business, or at least make them irrelevant. and I'm not generally a fan of seeing 2 or 3 companies consolidate and own everything. Companies like Google, companies like Amazon, I'm generally not a fan of that. I think it's a little bit intimidating, a little bit scary. Alright, so now on to the show. From what I've seen of the preview stuff, I didn't think the character designs were very memorable, especially coming off of Hibike Euphonium, which, for all of its faults, had really memorable characters and character designs. Before I give you my just straight up honest opinions, because I don't care about any flack I get from this from the 30 people that watch my videos, but I love Kyoto Animation, K-On!, Haruhi, these are some of my favorite series of all time. I even like Tamako Market, even Beyond the Boundary, everyone hated that show. I even liked that a little bit. But this show, Violet Evergarden, if I didn't know this was a huge show from Kyoto Animation and it didn't look as high budget as it does, I probably wouldn't have been that excited by this episode. In fact, it was pretty fucking boring, and I honestly hate to admit that. If this was some no-name show by A1 Pictures with average visuals, but otherwise exactly the same, I don't think anyone would give a shit about this show. The big talking point about this show is, oh, it's so beautiful, it looks so good, it's the best looking show ever. And I'm not going to deny, of course it's clearly high budget looking, it's a high-end show, but I think it's overproduced. It looks like someone was playing Skyrim and put one too many mods onto it and turned the sharpening up just a little too high. They took the filters, they took the extra effects even further than Hibike Euphonium, which was already pushing it. But looking overproduced is the least of this show's problems. I was expecting this to be a super serious show, or at least heavily plot-driven, but this first episode doesn't even set up a narrative beyond your standard run-of-the-mill anime. The tropes, the dialogue, the format, nothing has any flavor here whatsoever. This shit makes Hibike Euphonium look like a narrative masterpiece. I get that Violet not having a personality is the point of the show, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the show doesn't have to have a personality either. Since this episode didn't set up any conflict, major plot, or character dynamics, I'm left to assume that what we're getting here is a slice-of-life show where the gimmick is the character having PTSD from the war, but simultaneously having no emotion at the same time, so I'm not sure how the fuck that works. This type of show is the reason why I have a hard time talking about anime sometimes, because the way it plays out and the issues that I have with it are what feels like nothing to me. There's just no other way to articulate it. The interactions feel like they were created with predictive text. The I want to know what love is path that this show is going down is already generic, and then the execution is bland as hell. So I'm sitting there bored because it feels like I've already watched this 100 times. Now, Hibike Euphonium also gave me a little bit of that vibe, kind of boring, felt like a generic school anime where the characters were in a club competing for something, but at the very least, the characters were extremely memorable, they looked great, they sounded great, they had memorable personalities. This show reminds me a lot of Sora no Wodo, where I watched that show, I thought it would be something that I should like, and I'm like, why am I not liking this? Why am I not liking this? And then I realized I'm just bored, and I stopped watching the show. I'm like, this isn't for me, it's kind of boring, I don't like it. So unless this show does a complete 180, which I'm not expecting, I'm not interested in it. I don't know if I'll even come around and watch the whole show, because I just thought the first episode was so fucking boring. I personally wouldn't recommend this show, but it's such a big deal. It's a Kyoto Animation show. It's so hyped up that maybe it is worthwhile to go check out the first episode for yourself and make your own judgment. And this is the one show. I want to hear what people think of this show down below, because I feel like some people are kind of scared to say that it's not very good, or at least doesn't seem very good, but I don't give two fucks. I don't think it was good at all. I would say that this is one of the other big shows airing this season, and it's an adaptation of a manga that I've not only heard of, but actually read a little bit of for once. The visuals are decent, the character designs are alright, I don't think it looks as strong as the manga does, but the voices are exactly how I imagined them to be. Since I read the first volume already, episode 1 was deja vu for me, but the setup is solid and interesting. The main girl is transferring to an all-girls school because her mother remarried, and then when she gets to the school, she gets in trouble with the student president because she's not adhering to the dress code. Then the president is the granddaughter of the owner of the school, and the main girl catches the president having a good time with one of the teachers who she's going to marry for some reason. When the main girl comes home, she finds out that she's going to have a stepsister living with her, which ends up being the president girl. I didn't read further than that, so I don't know what happens, but somehow the president girl and the main girl end up in a secret relationship. It's more interesting than it sounds, and I'll eventually watch the show. These Yuri stories can be really great when they're executed properly and tastefully. I've been reading a manga lately, Girlfriends, and it's been fantastic, but it's incredibly subtle, and nothing Yuri happens until like halfway through. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have something like Sakura Trick, which is the antithesis of subtlety and taste. From what I've seen and read, Citrus is more like Girlfriends and less like Sakura Trick. Don't watch this unless you're into Yuri, but in that case, you probably already know about this show. This is the Noitamina show for the season, and like I mentioned earlier, that means that it's going to be on Amazon Prime exclusively for streaming. This one is by Wit Studio, who did Attack on Titan and Cabernaria of the Iron Fortress, and while they do this show, they're also continuing the Ancient Magus Bride. This is a little different from what they usually do. It's listed as being a straight-up romance show, which is whoa!
Stop! No!
This is one of the first things that the viewer is greeted with, and after I see that, there's no way in fucking hell that I can take anything that comes after seriously. It doesn't always look like that, which is maybe a good thing, but the fact that it ever does, just no.
Do not explain it. No, I gotta explain. Do not rationalize this behavior.
Now, if everything else was jaw-dropping amazing, maybe I could force myself to stare at that body horror, but this is just paint-by-numbers, slow romance anime number 1000. It does have its gimmick, and the gimmick makes things even worse. The giraffe is a high school student that works at a cafe, groundbreaking stuff I know, and she's in love with her manager. Now, the real gimmick here is that the manager is a 45-year-old man. That's gonna weird some people out, make them uncomfortable, make them immediately dismiss the show. I'm okay with shows tackling taboo subjects if they do it in an interesting and thought-provoking way, but from what I can tell in this first episode, this show's not doing any of that. So that's a thing. The characters, especially Giraffe Girl, are nondescript, completely disinteresting, and I barely made it through one episode of this, so I can't imagine sitting through 12. Noitamina shows are always hit or miss, and for me, this one's a big miss. But here's the thing, after I watch a lot of these shows for these videos, I like to go onto forums, MAL, 4chan, and see how people are feeling about the show's airing, and there's like a sizable amount of people who genuinely like this show, and I can't for the life of me figure out why. I've watched so many anime romance shows, and this just doesn't appeal to me. It reminded me of that one show, the Kawaii Complex Guide to Manners, whatever the fuck. I didn't like the characters in that, the dialogue felt stilted, and I hated the way everything looked. My guess is that Ancient Magus Bride is their big show, so this is probably the B team working on this one. If I was chatting with a friend and he asked me, should I watch this show? I would tell him, nah fam, don't pick that one up. So the second I put this show on, it immediately looked like any old A1 Pictures show. It says that it takes place 100 years from now, but the modern things that they show in this show are stuff like a guy with his cell phone and then his sister's coming and then he can see physically on his phone that his sister is near him, like on his GPS map. That feature is already on Facebook Messenger right now, so if that's all the more we can do in 100 years, then I'm pretty disappointed. I like that the one guy that was walking about during the boring-ass intro of this show observed that robots are only given human-like features to help sell products. That might seem like a pretty low-level observation, and it is, but after dealing with all the terrible anime that I have, I'll take any bit of thoughtfulness I can get. Then the main light novel ass-looking guy is in this parking lot chatting with this old android woman, and nanomachines fall from the sky and make the robots malfunction, at which point the old lady robot he was with starts to choke him out. Then he's saved out of nowhere by the attractive robot girl on the cover. Right after he meets the robot girl, there is what feels like an eternity of filler exposition about something about becoming an owner and scanning his biometrics, some kind of legal contract. This show is inevitably going to be compared to Plastic Memories, a show that I've seen get a lot of shit, but I liked it. It had charm, it had appeal. Beatless doesn't have any of that. Imagine Plastic Memories with no subtlety and just action shoved in there, like standard A1 Pictures, run-of-the-mill, light novel action just shoved right in there. Now, this was not the worst or most boring show that I watched, but it was still pretty damn boring. It's a light novel adaptation, and you can tell. I can't find anything I like about this show, and I would never recommend it to anyone. So there's not much to say about Cardcaptor Sakura Clear Card. I like how they did the art style. I think it's made a pretty graceful transition from the old school show to this new one here. Of course, it still is what it is. Even if it's the most recognizable title in its genre, it's still a magical girl show. That's not going to change. But I do think it's pretty impressive that they were able to take an iconic series and continue it years later as if nothing happened. And that's the reason I decided to throw this in here. I wanted to check it out because I thought, well, this might be a huge disaster, and it's not, and they deserve praise for that. So this show, just looking at the title and seeing that it's a 24-episode show by A1 Pictures, I thought, well, this is gonna fucking suck, I'm gonna hate this, I'm gonna relentlessly make fun of this, and it's pretty high up on the ranking. It's number 5 on the popularity list for this season on my anime list. There is one thing that is a little bit different and interesting about it, though, and that is the involvement from Trigger. Trigger was the studio founded by former Gainax employees, and then they went on to make Kill la Kill and Little Witch Academia. I'm sure most people are familiar with them. But Trigger involvement does not guarantee a show is good. Trigger have put out stuff that I think is bad in the past. The synopsis for this show makes the premise seem like a generic mecha show, and it sort of is, but it's really not that bad. The main guy is a bland, light novelish blank slate of a character, but the girl with the horns at least has some personality and a nice character design. There are undeniable parallels to Evangelion here, from the mech designs to the atmosphere itself. The one difference is that the mechs require 2 people to pilot them like Pacific Rim. As you would expect, after the horned girl's partner dies, the main guy is magically an ace pilot and saves the base from catastrophe. But there's just something about this show, I'm not sure what it is, there's something about it that draws me to it. I've talked to other people who watched the first episode, and they liked it as well, but I still can't put my finger on what it is that's drawing myself and others to it. I don't know if it'll be able to hold up for 24 episodes, but the first episode was not bad at all. It didn't set up much of a conflict besides the typical mecha premise of a monster threat, but I think this is something to look out for, and it'll probably be one of the more talked about shows of the season. This show has Isekai in the title, so at least you know what you're getting yourself into. 29-year-old programmer Suzuki Ichiro finds himself transported into a fantasy RPG. Within the game, he's a 15-year-old named Sato. At first, he thinks he's dreaming, but his experiences seem very real. Due to a powerful ability he possesses with limited use, he ends up wiping out an army of lizard men and becomes a high-leveled adventurer. Sato decides to hide his level and plans to live peacefully and meet new people. However, developments in the game's story, such as the return of a demon king, may cause a nuisance to Sato's plans. So the visuals in this show. If I saw this with no prior context, and you told me it was from 2008, I'd believe you. Isekai is always Isekai, but sometimes it can be more mystical, more fantastical, or it can be more video game based. This one is video game based, so as the synopsis says, he becomes a level 300 something fuckmaster, maximum abilities, blah blah blah. This show makes Sword Art Online look like a fucking masterpiece. A hallmark of these shows is having the main character monologue for 2/3 of the first episode, and this is no exception. At the end, he magically runs into some girl and then it abruptly ends. The ending song shows a lot of other girls that didn't appear in this episode, so it's probably a harem show, I guess. I don't really care, to be honest. Just like that smartphone isekai show from 2 seasons ago, I don't know who's watching this shit. I don't know how it keeps getting made. It must be really cheap to make these shows because there's just no other explanation for them. I also can't imagine the soul-crushing reality of being the director for this show, like having your name attached to something like this. Then there's the lower-level people who slaved over this, probably younger people who hustled hardcore to get to make anime, and then this is what they get to make. I feel bad for them. I usually see shows like this, the absolute bottom of the barrel stuff. But the difference with this show is that it is ranked number fucking 6 most popular on the MAL list for the season, 2 spots above even Pop Team Epic. What the fuck is wrong with these people? And then the average user score is notably higher than Beatless. I mean, on what planet? Beatless is bad. I thought it was bad and boring, but on what fucking planet is this better than Beatless? What the fuck? At least Beatless looks like it came from this decade. That's more than you can say about this fucking show. Yeah, if you can't tell, I don't recommend this show. I don't recommend it at all. Ito Junji, the master of manga horror and third member of the unholy trinity that was going to create the cancelled Silent Hills. After watching the most recent Death Stranding trailer, I'm convinced he's involved with that project as well, but now I'm getting off topic. This is an anime adaptation of some of his short stories done by the prestigious Studio Dean, who brought you masterpieces such as the original Fate Stay Night TV series. More recently, they did Konosuba, which was mostly good, but they still have a reputation for being fucking terrible. With this show, they played things safe by animating as little as possible, but it's otherwise not terrible looking. The first episode was about this wannabe edgelord disturbed kid that went around mailing voodoo dolls, collecting toads and spiders to scare his sister, stuff like that. The issue here being that it was neither scary nor interesting. Now, based off of this, I'm not really interested in this show. I didn't think it was very good, but the whole thing about this is that it's random short stories, so the next episode is going to be completely unrelated to what happened in this, but the way it was executed, it just felt kind of weird, and if you're going to pick this as your first episode, you'd think you would bring out, like, your good stuff for the first one, bring people in. So I'm not too optimistic about this show. I don't think I'll check back in on it. I probably wouldn't recommend it either. This is a show about a squad of lollies that conduct tactical espionage operations on the streets of Tokyo. So basically, this is a slice-of-life cute stuff show, and for what it is, I didn't think it was bad at all. I was rather impressed by how good it looked. I like the colors, and the opening is nice. The characters, as well as their designs, are likable enough, and the jokes aren't terrible. At the very least, this show isn't pure nothingness, and it does have a personality. This is the kind of show that I would watch if my only hobby was watching anime. So if I hear good things about this show after a few more episodes are out, I probably will watch it. I'm sure most of you know about or have at least seen this once, whether you know it or not. It started out as a webcomic about these two outrageous characters making references to pop culture. It quickly became a massive meme, and in the past year, I've seen these characters everywhere. The most popular one has to be You Are Motherfucker. Here we are now in 2018, and this somehow got an anime adaptation. It's already doing super well right out of the gate, and I see people sharing clips from it everywhere. This show is complete chaos as you would expect, non-sequitur after non-sequitur in rapid-fire succession. It's basically the format of an old-school Adult Swim show. The episodes are 12 minutes, and you would hope, because length is detrimental to stuff like this. But even at 12 minutes apiece, I don't know if I'm getting ready to watch more of this show. That being said, I'm super impressed by how well made it is. It's changing its style every 2 seconds, and the sheer amount of references and jokes they managed to pack in must have been a huge undertaking. The first 6 minutes had Kimi no Na wa, Pokemon Totoro, Guardians of the Galaxy, fucking Skyrim. Is it LOL random humor? Yeah, pretty much. Is it a shitty viewing experience? I think it kind of is. It's a little bit jarring. This type of humor, admittedly, isn't really for me. I'm not laughing out loud at this the same way I would at $1 Million Extreme World Peace. Unlike something like that, it's not short skits, it's literally just Vine-length clips. I feel like you could get just as much enjoyment by just watching YouTube compilation videos or watching the clips and screen caps that people are throwing onto Twitter. All that being said, I don't hate it or anything like that, it's just not my thing, and I question if this format is the best way to deliver this type of humor. Whether you choose to or not, you'll probably end up watching bits of Pop Team Epic anyway. As the name and opening would suggest, this bitch loves eating noodles. This show has one of the lower aggregate user ratings for the season, which I think is kind of ridiculous. Last I checked, it's a full point below that Isekai show. For fuck's sake, come on. Yes, this shit is a boring waste of time, but like Beatless, at least it looks like it came from this decade. This is a slice-of-life eating show, Kofuku Graffiti being the most well-known example of what this is. It's boring, it's nothingness, they literally do nothing but eat ramen, talk about eating ramen, talk about wanting to eat ramen, talking about wanting to talk about wanting to eat ramen. It's probably even more boring than Dagashi Kashi, which, by the way, that shit somehow has a second season airing, like right now. But this show, 12 episodes at 22 minutes apiece, get the fuck out of here. No way. My first impression of this show was, damn, that looks nice. I was not expecting that, so I went and checked who made it, and this is a Madhouse show. They've recently made One Punch Man, No Game, No Life, and in the past they did the Satoshi Kon movies, Paprika, Tokyo Godfathers, Perfect Blue. This show is nothing at all like any of those. Instead, it gives off more of a Hanasaku Iroha feel. While it has a similar look and feel, this isn't actually a slice of life show. Instead, it's about a girl who comes across 1 million yen, about $10,000 US, so enough to buy a single jacket at the Gucci store. Instead of doing that, she finds the girl who lost it, and they decide to go on a trip to Antarctica to find the girl's mother. So because of that alone, it's kind of impossible for the show to be nothing. There's a beginning and end destination, so it's not going to be sitting in a classroom for 13 episodes. The first episode was well put together, presented in a cinematic fashion, the characters had good personalities and natural interactions. This just might be a good show, and it's certainly my style. This isn't a huge action show, there's no crazy sci-fi or fantasy elements, but I still think it's different and interesting. I think this has the most potential out of any of the shows on this entire list, so I'm definitely going to check back in on it and see how it does after a few more episodes are out. This is another fucking eating show here, a bunch of adult women that live in an apartment and they all drink beer 24/7, which I guess technically makes this a drinking show, but it's basically identical to the eating show about the ramen from earlier. All kinds of filler exposition with technical information about how you should drink beer properly, basically just an advertisement for Yabisu beer. It's a good thing the episodes are 12 minutes long, because if they weren't, I would not have made it through this episode. Definitely do not recommend. Here we are with yet another slice of life comedy show, but at least it's the last one on the list. Let me be clear that I don't hate slice of life comedy shows. Keion and Gochi Usa are some of my all-time favorite shows, but it seems like more and more these low-budget shows use the success of good slice of life shows to make a low-effort nothing show. I mean, sometimes they're good, there's those hidden gems, but I'm just getting so sick of this shit in general. Like, most of the shows that fell into this category that I watched to make this video were a chore to watch. Entertainment should not be a chore to watch. So is Yuru Camp a chore to watch? I sure think so. This show is about camping, and it 100% felt like watching someone camp in real time, and not in a good way. For some reason, this show looks low resolution, like sub 720p, but at least the character designs are solid. This show did not shatter my preconceived notions that I mentioned earlier, and I do not recommend it. I saved one of the most talked about shows for last. Devilman Crybaby is a Netflix-funded show based off of an iconic manga that I am not at all familiar with. Since this is Netflix, all of the episodes were dropped at once, and I heard nothing but great things before going in. Looking at the show though, I thought it wasn't for me. Right off the bat, I think the character designs are somewhat hideous, and there are a ton of static shots, looping shots, budget-saving stuff, and it's really obvious. In spite of that, it still has a great sense of style. I love the soundtrack, the shot composition is great, and there are so many insane-looking moments just in the first episode alone. However, based off of just the first episode alone, this comes off to me as some edgy, hyper-violent, hyper-sexualized shock value entertainment. There's nothing here that's set up to make me interested in the plot, it's skeletal at best. I had no idea what was going on with any of the characters. It was an incredibly scattered, jarring experience. I know that's probably what the point of the show is, but just because that's the intention doesn't mean it's good. I'll probably watch more of this show since it's all out, and I really want to understand what all the fuss is about, but based off of the first episode, I can't entirely understand why so many people are going crazy for it, but it clearly has some sort of appeal. So those were my thoughts on a few of the shows I watched airing this season. I believe I watched 15 or 16 shows, that's quite a bit. Let me know down below what you thought of any shows that you watched this season, especially Violet Evergarden. I was immensely disappointed by it, and I want to know if anyone else feels the same way. But, of course, I only did watch the first episode of all these shows, so maybe at the end of the season, I'll look back on this and laugh as the ramen eating show becomes the most groundbreaking anime of all time, and I'm reviewing it and giving it a 10 out of 10. Until then, thanks for watching.